The white marble floors of the Farrow estate were cold enough to feel through the thin soles of Loretta Webb's work flats when Anton and his men escorted her to the center of the grand receiving room and left her standing there, alone, under the chandelier, like something brought in for judgment. She knew. 2 words, that was all Gideon Farrow gave her before the verdict came down. Loretta was 26 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, and 267 pounds of a woman who had spent most of her life being told she occupied too much space. She had learned, slowly, stubbornly, at considerable cost, to carry her body like something she had chosen rather than something that had happened to her. Her broad hips, her full arms, the soft curve of her belly beneath her housekeeper's uniform. She had made an uneasy peace with every inch of it. She had stopped apologizing. She had stopped trying to disappear. But standing in the center of that cavernous room, ringed by men in dark suits who stared at the floor instead of her face, she felt every pound as a liability she couldn't put down. Gideon stood by the fireplace with his back half turned, as if she were already beneath his notice. He was 40 years old, silver threading through dark hair at the temples, built like something carved from difficult material, the head of the New Orleans syndicate. A man whose name alone could empty a room or fill a courtroom, depending on the season. For 7 months, he had been her impossible, terrifying, complicated secret. A man who had walked into the hotel room she was finishing up on the 14th floor, looked at her like she was something worth stopping for, and somehow never stopped. And now he looked at her like she was a problem he was solving. Gideon. She kept her voice level. Whatever they told you, whatever Dara said or did, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know she was running anything through your operation. I didn't know she'd even been in contact with the Vallard people. He turned. Slowly, the firelight caught the hard set of his jaw. Your sister didn't just skim from the supply line, he said. She handed the Vallard cartel a complete map of my southern distribution network. Routes, pickup windows, the names and home addresses of 3 of my drivers. A pause that stretched like a wire being pulled taut. 2 of those men are dead, Loretta, killed at a checkpoint that was compromised using information only someone inside this house could have provided. She's an addict, Loretta said. Her voice cracked and she let it, because she was done performing composure for men who had already decided. She's 22 years old, and she has been in and out of rehab since she was 17, and she does desperate, terrible things when she's using. I know that. I know that better than anyone alive. But I have never once asked you about your business. I clean hotel rooms. I have never asked where the money comes from, or where the shipments go, or what happens in this building after midnight. You know that. What I know, Gideon said quietly, crossing the room until he was close enough that she could smell cedar and something colder beneath it, is that you told your sister you were living here, that within 2 weeks of you moving into this house, the Vallard cartel had a working diagram of my private garage and the shift rotation of the men who guard it. He held her gaze, and there was something terrible in his. Not cruelty, worse than cruelty. Certainty. You understand why I cannot separate those 2 facts. Because it's easier to blame me, she said. Because blaming me means you don't have to sit with the possibility that your own security had a leak that had nothing to do with me. Because I'm the housekeeper from Metairie who somehow ended up in your bed, and it's a much cleaner story if I was always in on it. She felt tears she refused to let fall pressing at the back of her eyes. I loved you. That was the whole of my crime. I loved you, and I had the misfortune of having a sister who ruined it. Something moved across his face, a fault line hairline then it sealed. Dara will answer for what she's done, he said. And you? His eyes moved from her face to her throat, to the thin gold chain he had clasped there himself one Sunday morning when she was still half asleep. You leave tonight. You take nothing of mine. Not the jewelry, not the wardrobe, not the car. Not the card he turned away from her, Anton. His lieutenant stepped forward from the shadow by the door. Take her to the service quarters. Whatever she brought with her on her first day, that's what she walks out with. Not a thread more. Loretta had arrived on her first day with a rolling suitcase, a Walmart coat, a pair of backup work shoes in a plastic bag, and a money order for $412 that represented the entirety of what she'd saved toward Dara's next treatment program. She had come because the Farrow Grand paid housekeeping staff $4 above minimum wage and had dental, and she had needed both badly enough to take a bus across town at 5 in the morning. She had not come to fall in love. She had never once planned for any of this. In the service quarters, she changed back into the jeans she'd arrived in. The ones with the worn patch at the inner left knee, the ones he had quietly replaced a month ago without making anything of it, just set a stack of new ones on the dresser while she was sleeping and never mentioned it. She pulled the grey hoodie over her head, the one with the faded letters of a university she'd never attended, bought from a thrift rack for $3, because it was big enough to be comfortable and warm enough to matter. She unclasped the gold chain and laid it on the dresser. She left the cashmere coat he'd bought because he'd noticed, without being told, that she got cold. She left the leather boots, the good perfume, the silver cuff bracelet, every single thing she had been given that was better than what she'd started with. Anton walked her to the side gate without speaking a word. She stepped out into a February night in New Orleans, damp and needle-cold in the particular way that city has, not blizzard cold, but the kind that goes straight through what you're wearing and parks itself in your joints. The streetlights made pale halos in the mist. Somewhere 3 blocks over, someone was playing trumpet, slow and low, the way there was always music in that city. Underneath everything, even this. Loretta stood on the sidewalk. She did not move. She placed her hand flat against her lower belly. She had taken a test that morning, the second one, to be certain, and stared at 2 pink lines for a long time before she put it in her coat pocket and went about her shift. She had spent the entire day turning over the problem of how and when to tell him. A man who ran an empire on the premise that he owed nothing to anyone. A man who had told her once, carefully, that he didn't think he'd been built for permanence. She had been working up to it. Terrified, but working up to it. She was not terrified anymore. She pressed her palm harder against her stomach, and she made herself a vow in the cold and the mist and the distant trumpet sound. He had told her to take nothing of his. He was wrong about what she was taking, and she would make absolutely certain that Gideon Farrow never found out. 4.5 years later, the bell above the door of Webb's Pie and Coffee chimed at 7:43 on a Thursday morning, the same as it always did when the early regulars started coming. The shop was small, 8 mismatched tables, a counter with 4 stools, a glass display case that Loretta replenished twice a day, and it smelled of brown sugar and butter and the morning's first pot of coffee, which was the smell of everything she had built from nothing, using only her own hands, and the single-minded stubbornness that had always been the best thing about her. Loretta was 29 now, broader through the shoulders than she'd been in New Orleans, her arms strong from hauling commercial mixing bowls and 50-pound flour bags before dawn. Her dark curls were always pinned back by opening time. She wore the same kind of apron over the same kind of jeans, and she had long since stopped treating her body as something to negotiate with. She had stopped somewhere around the time Gracie learned to walk and started looking at her mother like she was the most competent person on earth, and Loretta had decided to agree. "Mama." Gracie's voice came from the back corner booth, where she sat every morning with a cup of apple juice, a coloring book, and whatever project Loretta had set up the night before. Today, she had abandoned the coloring book and was watching the front door with the calm, evaluating patience that had been her default expression since the first week of her life. Somebody knew. Loretta looked up from the display case. The man near the door was wearing a dark overcoat that cost more than Loretta's monthly supply order. He was mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with a scar along his jaw that she would have recognized in a blackout. He was looking at her the way people looked at things they weren't confident they were seeing correctly. Sutter Gideon's right hand for 15 years. Loretta's body understood before her mind had finished processing. The floor seemed to shift just slightly beneath her feet. "Be right with you," she said, her voice coming out even. She walked toward the back corner at a deliberate, unhurried pace. She positioned herself between Sutter's line of sight and the booth, using the full breadth of her shoulders and hips without thinking about it. She had learned things about herself in 4 years of raising a daughter alone. One of them was that she was very good at standing in the way. "Loretta." Sutter's voice was careful, quiet. He hadn't moved from the door. "We thought, after everything, we assumed you'd left the country. I want you to walk back out that door," she said, her voice low and flat. "I am not part of that world. I haven't been for 4.5 years. I live quietly. I run a legitimate business. I bother no one." "The boss," Sutter started. "He told me to go," she said. "He had me stripped of everything he'd ever given me, and he put me out the side gate in a February night. I honored that. I asked for nothing back. I want the same courtesy extended to me now." She held Sutter's gaze. "Turn around. Forget what you saw." "Mama." Gracie had climbed down from the booth and was pressing her face against the back of Loretta's leg, peering around it at Sutter with the frank, unguarded curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking. Loretta felt the shift happen, the exact moment the air in the room changed. She saw it move across Sutter's face like a weather pattern, the recognition. The slow, complete, undeniable recognition of a man who had spent 15 years watching one face closely enough to know it anywhere, in any size, on any person. Gracie had Loretta's curls and Loretta's dimples and the round, warm softness of Loretta's cheeks, but her eyes, wide-set, pale silver gray, the color of winter water, were not Loretta's. Loretta's eyes were brown and warm. These eyes had never belonged to anyone named Webb. These were Gideon Farrow's eyes on a 4-year-old's face, and there was not a single thing ambiguous about it. Sutter looked up. He met Loretta's gaze, and she saw the apology in it before he opened his mouth. "I'm going to walk out," he said very quietly. "But Loretta, I have to make a call." "I know you do," she said. "I'm sorry." He left. The bell rang cheerfully. Loretta stood still for 3 seconds. Then she lifted Gracie off the floor, pressed her nose against her daughter's neck, breathed in apple juice and the warmth of her skin, and let herself have those 3 seconds before she set the girl down and started moving. 1,000 miles south, in a building on Magazine Street that the city officially believed housed a hospitality consulting firm, Gideon Farrow sat behind his desk at 11:15 at night and stared at a photograph on his phone. Blurry, shot through a plate glass window, afternoon sun cutting across it. A woman with dark curls, broader and stronger than he remembered, in an apron that had flour on it, and beside her a child, face half turned toward the camera, one hand reaching up. Gideon had always had good eyes. He zoomed in. He sat very still for approximately 8 seconds. Then the crystal glass in his hand hit the hardwood floor. He was already standing before it stopped rolling. "Get the car," he said into his phone. "Airport now." He came without his full detail. He came alone, or close enough to it, because something in him knew that arriving in force was the wrong approach, and he was too far gone on adrenaline and 5 years of compacted regret to think clearly about much else. It was the first tactical error he had made in a decade. It would not go unnoticed. Loretta was in the middle of the second bag when she heard the engines outside. More than one, cutting off in careful sequence the practiced silence of men who did this for a living. The wrong men. She knew the difference. She had spent 7 months learning to read the sounds of that world, even when she pretended she wasn't paying attention. She picked Gracie up, put her finger to her lips. The girl nodded, solemn and immediately compliant, in the way she only was when she sensed something serious. The shop door downstairs did not open. It was taken off, a single impact, controlled and precise, and the footsteps that followed spread out through the lower floor in a pattern that told her everything she needed to know about their purpose. Then the second set of footsteps hit the stairs, heavier, slower, a different intent entirely. The bedroom door opened. Gideon Farrow stepped through it, and just like that, 4.5 years of carefully constructed distance collapsed into the length of a single room. He was older. The lines framing his mouth had deepened. He had the look of a man who had won everything he set out to win and found it insufficient. His eyes found her immediately, all of her, the way they always had, without cataloguing, without hesitation, and for a moment he just stood there. "There are men downstairs," Loretta said. "They're not yours." Vallard remnants. He was already moving past her, positioning himself between her and the window. "They tracked the tail number on the plane. I came without." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I wasn't careful." "No," she said, "you weren't." What followed was loud and fast and terrifying. Loretta held Gracie beneath her on the floor behind the bed frame and counted the shots and thought, with the strange clarity that arrives in extreme moments, that she was going to be furious about the damage to her walls if they survived this. Gideon moved through her bedroom like a man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms like this. All precision, no panics, nothing wasted. Then one shot landed anyway. He absorbed it without going down, pressed his forearm hard against his left side, and kept firing until the room went quiet. Loretta was already on her feet. She pulled the dish towel from beside the sink, crossed the room, and pressed it hard against the wound without asking his permission. He hissed through his teeth. He didn't move her hands. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable." How bad? Went through the side, missed anything important. "Hold this." She guided his hand to the towel. "Press hard." He pressed. Gracie came out from behind the bed. She stood beside Loretta's knee and looked at Gideon with the focused, unhurried attention she gave to things she had decided were worth understanding. She looked at the blood. She looked at his face. She tilted her head to one side in a gesture so precise and so characteristic that Loretta's breath snagged in her throat. Gideon saw it happen. She watched him see it. He lowered himself, slowly, carefully, one hand still braced against his side, until he was on one knee on her bedroom floor. He was a large man, and kneeling made him look not smaller but more present somehow, more real. He looked at Gracie at eye level, and Loretta watched the expression on his face do something she had never seen it do. It opened. "Hey," he said very quietly. "You got hurt," Gracie said, with the calm certainty of a professional assessor. "Yeah." "Mama fixes her to pause. She's very good at it." "I know she is," he exhaled, the breath unsteady at the edges. "She always was." Loretta reached for the first aid kit without looking away from him. Gracie, the big kit, under the sink. When Gracie padded off to retrieve it, Loretta crouched in front of Gideon and looked him directly in the face, something she had promised herself she would do if this moment ever came. No flinching, no looking at the floor. "Dara," she said, "tell me the truth right now, or I stop this bandage and call 911, and you answer to whatever jurisdiction picks up the call." He met her eyes. "She's alive," he said. "I transferred her to a residential treatment facility in Asheville 3 weeks after I put you out. I've been covering the cost for 4 years. She's been clean for 3. He paused. "She thinks you cut contact. She doesn't know any of the rest of it. The room seemed to rearrange itself around Loretta. 4 years of grief, the specific, compacted grief of mourning someone you couldn't grieve publicly, shifted in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said, barely above a whisper. "Because I was handling the Vallard situation, and then I was handling the fallout from the Vallard situation, and every time I had it planned, every time I had the car ready, my people told me the same thing." His voice was steady, flat with honesty. "If my enemies found out there was a woman I would surface for, she'd be dead before I got to her. The way I handled it, stripping you publicly, making you walk out with nothing, it sent a message. It meant no one came looking for you." He looked at her. "You were safe. That was the priority. You could have told me that before you did it," she said. "You could have trusted me with the truth of what you were doing." "Yes," he said, "no excuse, no pivot, I should have." Gracie returned with the kit. Loretta took it, opened it, and got to work. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when something needed doing. Gracie climbed up onto the edge of the bed to watch, leaning forward on her small elbows with the focused interest of an apprentice. "Your eyes look like mine," Gracie said, addressing Gideon with the directness she applied to everyone she had decided to accept. He swallowed. "They do. Mama says mine are special." "Your mama is right." Loretta tied off the bandage and sat back. She looked up at him, the most dangerous man in 3 states, sitting on her bedroom floor in Knoxville, Tennessee, letting a 4-year-old size him up. "Here is how this works," she said. She kept her voice the way she kept her hands. No tremble permitted. "If there is any version of this going forward, these are the terms. Gracie carries my name, not yours, not yet, and possibly not ever, and when she's old enough, that is entirely her choice. You do not bring your business anywhere near her or near this building. I keep the shop. I decide where I live. I am not tucked away in a guest wing of your house. I am not a secret, and I am not a kept woman." She held his gaze. "I am the only person who decides what I am. That was true before I met you, and it is more true now. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Gideon looked at her for a long moment. She saw him taking it in, actually taking it in, not waiting for his turn to speak, but listening the way she had never quite let herself believe he was capable of. "Yes," he said, every word. "Good," she stood up, held out her hand. "Then get off my floor." He took her hand, not to be pulled up, just to take it, and got to his feet on his own. He stood in front of her in the wreckage of her bedroom, and she stood in front of him in the life she had built without him, and the distance between them was exactly what she chose to make it. Gracie slid off the edge of the bed and pressed herself against Loretta's side, looking up at both of them. "Is he staying?" she asked. Loretta looked at Gideon. "That depends," she said, "on whether he can follow the rules." Gideon looked at Gracie. Something in his face was very careful and very quiet, and working very hard not to come apart. He looked at the little girl with his eyes, who had never been afraid of anything in her life, and who was currently watching him with patience, assessing calm, waiting for his answer, the same way Loretta waited for things, with the confidence of someone who has learned that time belongs to her. "I'm a fast learner," he said. Loretta held his gaze for one more beat. Then she nodded once, reached past him for her first aid kit, and crossed the room to begin assessing the damage to her walls. The blood that stained the floors of Webb's Pie and Coffee that Thursday morning was scrubbed clean by Friday. The door frame was replaced by the weekend. By Monday, when the first regulars came in for their coffee, and the display case was full of fresh pie, nothing in that shop looked like it had ever been anything but exactly this, warm and steady and entirely hers. Except that the corner booth had acquired a second cup. And the small girl with the silver eyes had stopped watching the door for things to be afraid of, and started watching it the way you watch for something you've decided you might as well let in.